Hello. How's everyone doing? Thank you for joining Building Personal Disaster Preparedness for Older Adults in Arkansas. We're so excited to have you join us today. I want to start off by thanking SBP for hosting this webinar with us. This is our second year working with SBP, and they have been so wonderful in offering us support here in Arkansas to help us become more disaster prepared. And so thank you to SBP and thank you to all for joining us. I want to say a little bit about why we do this. As a part of our livable communities priority, one of the things that we do is that we help people become more disaster prepared and more educated on how to prepare for disasters. Statistics say if you prepare for ahead of disasters, your recovery time is shorter and your recovery process is better. And so we want to do our part to make you more aware and how you can become more prepared. I do want to mention that we are looking for volunteers across the state of Arkansas who want to help us with this mission. And so if you're interested in joining AARP Arkansas and helping others to become more prepared, please Google AARP Arkansas. You can go on our website and you can learn more about those volunteer opportunities, or you can feel free to reach out to me anytime at pfry@aarp.org. Again, that's PFRY@AARP.org to learn more about those volunteer opportunities. We need more volunteers to help us spread the word about how to become more disaster prepared. And so I want to thank you again for everyone for joining us. And I want to turn this over to SVP to kick off everything. Thank you, SVP, again.
All right, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much, Patricia and team. My name is Tessa Barron. I'm with SBP. And today, my colleague Leanne will be leading us through a presentation here on really how to get better prepared at the household level for future disaster events. You see here, Leanne is SBP's Community Preparedness Engagement Manager. I am SBP's Disaster Preparedness Program Associate, and both of us sit in our Community Preparedness Program at SBP. Next slide, please. Just to give a little bit of a high level overview on who we are as an organization. And I'll also share a link later on where you can do a deep dive into our preparedness program at SBP. We are a disaster resilience and recovery organization, and we got our start just past 2 decades ago after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. In those early days, we really focused on rebuilding, on getting folks back home, getting families and individuals back into safe, sanitary, and secure housing conditions. Since then, we've really expanded out the scope of what we do. And so you can see here under our different programs, we have recovery services. So we still do rebuild after disasters, knowing that that's a critical need. And so we certainly do still work in the rebuilding space. But we now have expanded out our advisory work. And so what that means is we really aim to work across the disaster cycle to work with different audience sets, such as households, such as government leaders, practitioners, other nonprofits, businesses, and really aiming to equip these different groups with different knowledge, tools, and resources to make informed disaster preparedness decisions so we can reduce future risks, reduce future costs of damages, and really help to keep households, communities, and everyone safe in the face of future events. Next slide, please. Here, we're going to be doing a deep dive into household disaster preparedness, knowing that in order to build communities that are prepared, it really starts at the household level. And so we'll walk through here these main topic areas that you see. One, knowing your disaster risks, understanding that that is the foundation of disaster preparedness. Two, top tips going into how to make your preparedness plan and different considerations there. We'll then key in on purchasing the right insurance, knowing that building financial preparedness is a really crucial part of getting ready for disasters. And then we'll talk a little bit about mitigating property risks. So, different things to consider to make sure your property is in good shape and able to withstand different disaster events. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with contractor fraud. Again, knowing that part of a disaster is knowing how to prepare what if and when one does occur. And then we'll share some resources. So, with that, I'll pass it over to Leanne to get us into our first topic area.
Thank you, Tessa, and thank you everyone for being with us here today. We're starting with knowing your risk because we see it as like laying a foundation. Because in order to better prepare, we want to make sure that we know what we're preparing for, right? So getting started with that, We know that extreme weather events are happening, unfortunately, more frequently. They're happening in areas that they had never happened before, or maybe they didn't happen as recurrently there. And I think as we look at news every other week, we get to see that across the entire nation, but also in the state of Arkansas. Just a quick data fact here, which I always find very surprising, is that between 2011 and 2024, 40 states, so that represents 80% of the US, recorded 10 or more major disaster declarations. So in 28 of those states, every county experienced at least one disaster. When you think about that, that is very jarring, especially with how big states are in the US, right? And all of this is doing is that it's highlighting the growing and widespread nature, unfortunately, of these risks. And it also emphasizes the need for us to make sure that we're staying informed, that we're proactive about getting prepared, but most importantly, that we're understanding what our risks are. There's many tools that we can use to understand what our risks are in our homes, in our communities, but it's very important that you use multiple of those, not just one. So that way you're able to paint a better picture of what your risks are. Two great options to get us started are FEMA's National Risk Index, which we'll see a photo of in the next slide, and then also leveraging or using your local emergency management website. They're always going to have up-to-date information, but also locally relevant information that you can use to understand how to better prepare. As I mentioned here, we have to the right a screen grab of the National Risk Index. In this case, it's for Pulaski County. As you can see, also the risk index is relatively moderate. This is in comparison with the rest of the nation. What is really interesting about this is that you can put in your county or your city. It's going to give you a snapshot of what the risk index is. But also, once you're in the site, you'll be able to see what those top risks are that are informing that scoring level, if you'd like to call it that. And then to your left, you'll see this graphic from 2024. And just to harp on that topic that I just mentioned about these increasing risks, is that in 2024, there were 27 individual weather and climate disasters that reached at least 1 billion in damages. And that's only one less than the 28 events that reached that threshold of 1 billion in 2023. So that speaks to not only how frequently they're happening, but also just how impactful they've been financially within our communities. So just as important as understanding our risk, we want to make sure that we're taking steps to staying informed, whether that is about emanating risk or ways that we can take action. So that way we're staying as safe as possible, not just ourselves, but as we're also helping others, our communities, our loved ones. One thing that you can do is utilizing your local weather app or news app. Oftentimes, we already have these on our phones. So it's adding notifications, maybe for weather or different alerts, or understanding what different headlines or noises mean. Okay, this is something that's happening right now. Maybe this is more like a developing situation. Getting familiarized with how these apps work. Another really important one for when we don't have our phones on us or access to any technology is making sure that we have a NOAA weather radio. So when signal's lost, when all of our applications are just not working, we can still stay updated on potential hazards. And as you know, they're usually hand cranked or with batteries. Nowadays, they come solar powered, and you can get these for relatively cheap. And it's something good to always have on you. And then a couple of other apps that you can use that are really good for understanding risk, educating yourselves on those, but also understanding what is happening in different processes. You have FEMA's app, and then you also have the Red Cross Emergency app, which is also going to let you monitor different locations. And also let you know, like, hey, there's a severe thunderstorm happening. This is what it means. This is what you should do. So it's a really good app to use if that's the route that you want to take. And last but not least, and I dare to say one of the most important ones, is making sure that you're subscribed or signed up to your city's alert system. Not only would you receive critical weather information, but you can also receive information on public health, special events, and different types of emergencies. So if you're not signed up, or maybe you're not receiving alerts because you turned it off on your phone, make sure that you turn that on and sign up again. And then now that we talked a little bit about understanding our risks, let's get into making our preparedness plan. We divide this into three parts. First are the classic part of like gathering your supplies. Then we talk about different steps that you can take to make a plan with your household, and then we wrap it up with recovery planning. So starting off with gathering supplies, I know these lists we see everywhere, especially I would say like in the South, especially for hurricane season or tornado season, we see a lot of this, right? But when it comes to your kit, it's very important that you make sure that you have everything that you and your household need. So we're going to encourage you to tailor these lists. All of these items are very important, but oftentimes you'll see that you're going to need maybe some additional items or some items that look a little bit different, but do something similar so they can apply to what your needs and what your household needs. As we know, it's very important to stock up on those non-perishable items, easy to prepare foods and water. We want to make sure that we're sheltering in home, that we have at least a week's worth of food and water. So when we're thinking about water, a gallon of water per person per day, let's not forget our pets and these counts when it comes to food and water. And then when we're thinking about evacuation, as possible, making sure that we have a 3 days worth of supplies. Other items that you can think about are your medication or medical items that you might need. So asking the pharmacy for a travel supply of those is really good. Making sure now as we're going into winter weather that we have a heated blanket or extra blankets, especially having those in the car and a change of clothing, something warm. If you can have a snow blower or a shovel as well at hand, that is really great. And then your essentials such as flashlights and batteries for all of your different items. When gathering supplies, we want to make sure that you understand that it doesn't have to be expensive. Oftentimes, when we're talking with folks about these, well, people can get a little bit anxious because you're thinking about, oh my God, there's all these other things that one needs to focus on. And now I'm looking at this entire list of items that I need to get. Well, we invite you to first shop your home. Oftentimes, a lot of these items we already have in our home, we just need to make sure that we have them all and maybe in one container or in a space that we know they're all together and they're easy to grab. A lot of these items we can get at thrift stores or at budget stores, whether that be Dollar Tree, Five Below, even Walmart and different dollar sections. There's a lot of these little items that we can start picking up little by little. So we encourage you to do that, but also take advantage of sales tax holidays, which usually happen for these right before your extreme weather seasons, or if not, also reaching out to your different local organizations that they oftentimes, depending on the season that it is, they'll have different items that they're giving out to folks, or maybe they're giving kits with a couple of basic items so you can start building upon yours. So never hesitate to ask. And then here, stopping here for a second, because this part is very important. We want to make sure that you're taking time with your family to create a plan. So that way, everybody knows what they have to do, but it's also going to reduce the stress when something does happen. Make it a habit to check those emergency supplies each year. Make sure that anything that's expired gets changed, or maybe there's something new that's needed. Maybe now you know, like, hey, this person needs um, like anti-rash medication or something, or they are allergic to aspirin. So I need to make sure that the pain medication that we have in our kit is changed out. Different things like that. In our household, we usually do this at the top of the year because living in Texas, usually those April months with flooding and different like severe weather are a little bit intense. And of course, we have hurricane season. So we do that now around January and February to make sure that we're getting to do that. Pick a date that works for you and your family. Making sure again that you're staying connected to trusted information sources, such as what we talked about earlier. We want to make sure that we're getting our information from reputable sources and not just friends, family, or social media. We want to make sure that we're able to corroborate and fully understand what is being shared. Another good thing to do is to practice that plan. Once you establish what are we doing, where are we going, who's shutting off the water, who's shutting off the gas, these different type of things that we're practicing it. And I usually people don't like when I say this, but I think the holidays are a great time to be doing this with your families. Oftentimes everyone's there. That way, if maybe you have a family member who lives nearby and they often check up on you or you check up on them, they know what your plan is. You know what their plan is as well. And that way you can practice. So make the best of all the holiday gatherings to talk about these things. But it's also very important for you to understand either your workplace, if the school or anywhere you frequent has an emergency plan in place so you understand what their steps are. But oftentimes, as a lot of folks in the community, you're involved in different things. You're very active, right? You want to make sure that if they have you included in their plan, maybe they're thinking, okay, this person is going to help us prepare, put sandbags out, or they're going to help us lift up stuff to higher ground, that you're contemplating that in your plan as well. And as we're getting into the winter months, make sure that as possible, when winter storms are alerted of, make sure that you're not driving on harsh road conditions, that you're keeping aware for downed trees and power lines as well. And in all of this, again, never forget your pets. Okay, a very important part in our third part into emergency planning or disaster planning here is planning for recovery. It's oftentimes a thing that we don't necessarily think a lot about because we're oftentimes focused on just getting through the event, right? But this is very essential because once everything calms down, we want to make sure that we can get back to safe, sanitary, and secure housing conditions, that we can get back to our regular days and lives, and that it doesn't and that financial barriers are as reduced as possible. So when you're starting to think about what a recovery plan looks like for you, something that you can do is start thinking about your overall budget, and just financial picture. And if you don't have a financial plan or a budget in place, this is a good moment to start so you can better understand what are the spaces that you have wiggle room in, what are the things that you can do, and then this will lead you into what maybe are the different options that you can use. So we'll start with that. But also, it's very important to think there as you're going through that budget, maybe what are the things that I can do to set aside a little bit of money? And when you talk about setting aside a little bit of money, that's going to look very different for everyone based on their financial capacity. So when we're talking about making a recovery plan, we identify that there are four major sources of recovery funding. So that is savings, we have credit and loans, we have disaster aid. So when we talk about disaster aid, we're thinking about FEMA federal assistance, SBA, nonprofit assistance. That's what we're talking about there. And then, of course, we have insurance. While I'm not going to be going super in depth in each of these because I think we can talk for hours on each one of these, we're going to be giving you key highlights on these. Starting off with savings, we know how important it is to have emergency cash on hand, especially as we're navigating a disaster or an emergency, because oftentimes there's not going to be access to ATMs. Systems might be down due to power outages or signal outages. So we want to make sure that we have saved a couple extra dollars, maybe if that's for sheltering cost, for getting food, for getting gas, different type of things. I like to tell folks, even if you have $20 saved up, those $20 are maybe going to help you be able to put some money in your gas and in your gas tank, or maybe get some food. But those are $20 that maybe you wouldn't have had if you set them aside, if you hadn't had set them aside. So it's good to start wherever you can. Think about deductibles. If you have homeowners, flood insurance, car insurance, making sure that the deductible that is set within your rate, which deductible is the money that you give to your insurance company to be able to access that insurance service or that coverage, that you have that saved. So if something does happen, you're not left scrambling trying to put together money for the deductible, and you can get on with your recovery process as quickly as possible. And then we also want to think about any unexpected costs because oftentimes after a disaster, a lot happens, right? We have downed trees. Maybe there's a lot of debris in the yard or in the backyard. Maybe you're going to need to stay somewhere else for a little bit longer. So we want to think about those things. When it comes to loans, we're not financial experts here at SBP, so we recommend that folks meet with a financial counselor. Again, like we talked at the beginning about maybe putting together a budget or a financial plan. This is a good option to do with a financial counselor as well. They're going to help you look at your current budget. They're going to help you understand what resources you have or maybe resources that you should be accessing. They're going to help you plan for these unexpected events or expenses. And then you can look at opportunities. Maybe it's for mitigating risk in your home. So not only for recovery, but what other things you can do to protect your home ahead of time. Also, we encourage you to look at the Small Business Administration, or also known as SBA, because oftentimes when federal assistance is awarded or federal disasters are declared in a community, SBA is that first option that's provided to folks. And if you've had experience applying to FEMA, you've most likely been offered the option of a small interest loan through SBA. And something we've experienced a lot is that folks aren't super aware of what this means for them because we're so used to hearing the Small Business Administration. So we're thinking that they're serving only small businesses, but in reality, they're serving also homeowners and renters that are being that have been impacted by disasters. So getting familiarized with this process and what this looks like in the event that it is offered to you or maybe a loved one, you'll be able to take a more informed decision and not under pressure as well. And then to continue speaking here about federal disaster assistance, it's very important to balance expectations around it and help others do this too, because it could be very jarring when something does happen and federal disaster aid is not awarded or it's not the amount that people were expecting. It is very limited. Unfortunately, not every disaster is going to get a federal disaster declaration, which is what triggers that financial assistance. And even when it is, it's going to be very limited in the amount that folks get, but also it can take a long time depending on what's going on and what resources are going to be made available. There's also limits to how much repeat aid people can get. So it's good to understand if your home has an insurance mandate. Basically, when maybe that home received federal assistance in the past and now it's required to carry insurance for it. So different little like nuances that people need to be aware about to better understand how they qualify for federal assistance. Also, it's very important for you to understand that there's going to be a variety of tools to understand if you can apply for this. So we encourage folks always to go to disasterassistance.gov or to the FEMA website to get familiarized with that now before something happens, so that way they can navigate that process a little bit better. And just as important when we're talking about federal assistance, this is something folks don't often know or don't feel encouraged to do, and it's that you can appeal your federal assistance award if you believe that you should have received assistance in the case that you were denied. If the amount wasn't sufficient for the amount of damages that you experienced, you can do this. And there's many organizations that support with this, SBP being one of those. And in our processes, we've seen a lot of success around it. We've seen over 65% of survivors seeing an increase in their total FEMA award. And then folks have been awarded around $8,000 in additional FEMA funds to support their recovery. So as people usually say, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. Not saying that appealing is always going to be a guarantee that you're going to receive more assistance, but it's always good to try and to explore what that looks like. So now talking a little bit more about these different avenues to recover after a disaster, we're going to get into insurance now. So it's very important to understand the basics of insurance. And at SBP, I will say we're not also experts in insurance, but we're very familiar with it. So we're going to give you a very high level overview here because I understand that also in talking about insurance can be a very heavy topic. So we just want to get you started or if not refreshed into insurance. It's very important that you understand the basics of an insurance policy. If it's your first time getting insurance or if it's been a while since you've maybe looked at your policy, so that way that you understand what you're being covered for and also to understand if you have adequate insurance coverage. If you're a renter, please understand that your landlord's insurance only covers the structure of the building. It's not going to cover your personal belongings, so you're going to need to get renter's insurance to protect your possessions. So that's another very important topic there. So first, get started understanding what type of policy you have. Here we have a named peril policy, which usually covers specific perils listed in your policies. While then you have an all-risk policy, which is going to cover you for any accidental loss, except those explicitly excluded. Another key aspect is whether you have replacement cost coverage or actual cash value. And this is one that's very important to check because oftentimes I've seen folks impacted by disasters that weren't super clear on what their coverage value was. So it's good to understand this is what my coverage value is. And that way, if you don't like the coverage that you have and you have the possibility of changing it or of not preparing for that. So replacement cost coverage is when they reimburse you for items at their full replacement value, while actual cash value takes depreciation into account. So that means that oftentimes it's just not going to be enough to replace all of your belongings. This is why it's also very important to have a home inventory in place. And then talking here again about why it's important to understand what's in your policy, you want to make sure that you also understand what's not in your policy. So as we mentioned earlier, there's some exclusions in an all risk policy, right? So there's specific risks or events that aren't covered. That could be floods, that could be frozen pipes, war, earthquakes, sewer and drain backups, which we know happen, not just in disasters, that can happen in a regular day. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that these exclusions are in their homeowners or renters insurance because we're going to think, okay, it's homeowners or renters insurance. It's going to cover everything. We'll be fine. And unfortunately, that's not the case. So that's why it's also very important as you're reading through your insurance to highlight any things that maybe they're not making sense to you, or maybe there's something that you thought you had coverage for because maybe you discussed it, but you're not seeing it in the documentation. Highlight it, do a note, and call your insurance agent for clarification or a trusted friend or family member who's familiar with insurance. I know it's sometimes weird to call folks, but something that you can do once you call your insurance agent is prep them mentally and let them know. I'm calling because I have a couple of questions about my policy. Are you the right person to talk to, or can I be referred to someone to answer my questions? So that way they know that the call might be a little bit longer and that you're going to have a couple of questions that you would like to go through. And that way, I think, at least in my experience, it sets expectations all around a little bit better. Okay, going into the importance of insurance, you'll see that at SBP we talk a lot about flood insurance and flood events because we believe we not just that we believe, but we've seen how it's impacted communities nationwide, those who were used to flooding, those who weren't, and we see how it's continued to be a recurring issue. So that's why it's so important for us to advocate for folks to get flood insurance, but also just be completely adequately insured so it doesn't create a financial barrier once they are, if they're impacted by a disaster. To paint a picture here about what loss can look like, just 1 inch of water can cost up to $27,000 in damages in a home in the US. Yet the FEMA disaster assistance grant on average is only $5,000. So we're seeing a big gap already there between what damages are and that average of what FEMA assistance usually is. But then when we look at the average flood insurance payout, it's around 69,000. So there we see how insurance becomes the adequate way to cover for these disaster damages. If you haven't already or you're not familiar with it, I know flood insurance, oftentimes we just see dollar signs. It's good to explore what that might look like for you. Maybe you're outside of a mandatory flood zone, so that could be a little bit less. Maybe you're in one, but you haven't seen what all of your options are. There's a national flood insurance program, which usually it's a lower cost than your average flood insurance because this is run by FEMA. And what's really great about this is that in this year, 2025, starting in January, they started monthly payment options. And why is this so amazing? It's because in the past, for the lifespan of the National Flood Insurance Program, folks had to do one lump payment once a year. And we know that's not often a reality for folks. Not everyone can just immediately give $800 one time a year. So now by having it as monthly payments, it's become more accessible to individuals. So I encourage you to look it up. If you haven't in a long time, to look again to see what that insurance coverage can look like for you. Again, just going in on why it's so important to make sure that you have flood insurance. It's because, like we saw a couple of slides back, oftentimes flood insurance, or the majority of the times, it's not covered by your standard homeowners or renters insurance. That said, if you're a homeowner and even a renter, you can get flood insurance and you should. Even if your home is not in a high flood risk area, it's important to do so if you have the availability to do it, because as we've seen, there's a lot of places that weren't in flood zones or maybe had never flooded in decades, and now we're seeing them flood. So important to take that note. And just as a ballpark here, I know we were talking about what the NFIP or the National Flood Insurance looks like. On average, the policy costs around $800 per household. And then with some folks who are outside the flood insurance zone, they can oftentimes even be around $450 a year. That said, it's going to look very different per person, per location. So it's good to explore and speak with your insurance agent to see what that looks like. And to wrap up this topic here of insurance, because like I said, I know it could be a little bit heavy, but we want to make sure that you have all the right tools and information as you go on to make sure that you're adequately insured. Is that first, you're reviewing your homeowners and renters insurance. Again, make sure that you thoroughly check what is covered and if you need to make any edits. Then making sure that you're saving for deductibles. Like we talked, it could look like your car insurance, your homeowners insurance, your renter's insurance, but also setting aside emergency cash for all those unexpected and also expected costs that we might experience after a disaster. And last but not least, taking the time to create a home inventory. Similar to luggage, sometimes we think that we know everything that's in there, and then sometimes something comes and surprises us at the end of the bag. Similar with the homes, we have a lot of items that we have invested in that we love, that have been gifted, a lot of things in our home, right? And we want to make sure that those are protected, and if they need to be replaced, that we know that they can be replaced with whether insurance or different sources of support. So for home inventory, you can start by taking a video of your home. It could be as simple as walking outside, going to the front door, opening it, going through all the different rooms, and then in a second day, focusing room by room, taking photos or more detailed videos, writing down when this item was purchased, how much did it cost, if you have receipts for it, if you have a warranty. But if you at least start with that initial video, oftentimes it takes 5 to 10 minutes. It's a quick walk around your home. Open those drawers, open cabinets. At least you have something that can show not only the items in your home, but the state of your home before something happens. So if you need to get insurance or disaster aid, you can share, this is how my home was, but this is also the items that were in it. So that's a quick action. If you do anything this week, I recommend doing that. And then if you have any insurance claims concerns or want to look into more information or support that you have in your state, we recommend looking up the National Flood Insurance Program. We recommend also looking at the Division of Consumer Assistance in Arkansas. Again, there you can see what resources are available to you in your state. And then last but not least, we have United Policyholders. It's an excellent organization. They have a lot of great resources around insurance for folks nationwide. But also very important as we wrap up this topic about insurance is that please do not feel rushed or pressured into a settlement amount. Similar to what we talked about with FEMA assistance that folks can appeal, you can continue to come to an agreement with your insurance agency. And if you see that you're not getting to an agreement by yourself, I recommend that you look at the Division of Consumer Assistance so you can see what resources are available to you as a consumer and resident of the state so they can better support you so you can get the settlement amount that you need and deserve. So with that, we're going to go into securing your documents. This is a very quick but important section because a lot of the things that we talked about are going to be supported by documentation at the end of the day. And we want to make sure that recovery is a little bit easier for you. Something that throughout my years with SBP, with working with folks impacted by disasters, that I've seen folks be impacted by the most is not having access to their important documents. And those folks who did have access to those or were able to safeguard them, I've seen how they've moved a little bit quicker throughout their recovery process just for taking a couple minutes here and there to put all those documents together. So getting started, we have here a couple of different sections. When it comes to personal documentation, we want to make sure that you're thinking about everyone in the home. So all the folks who are in your household, if there's any other person outside of your household that you support, making sure that you have these items for them, but also thinking about your pets. So we're thinking here about IDs, birth and marriage certificates, any immigration documentation, your pet's documents, maybe that's vaccines, ownership records, anything that proves who you are and who's a part of your household and can better support all your other documentation. When we're talking about the household, make sure that you're keeping a list of all your emergency contacts. I know we have our trusty phones and we have there all of our emergency information oftentimes, or if not, we can just quickly Google what's the phone number for our water, electricity, or gas company. But if we don't have signal or power, or maybe our phone dies, we want to make sure that we have access to all this information. And if we get maybe a bar or two of signal, that we can quickly call because we have this on a list. So taking the time to put your family contacts and also those important service providers there, but also pulling together what are those few keepsakes. Maybe it's important photos, maybe any paperwork that would be irreplaceable, making sure that those are secured as well. When we're talking about financial and legal documents, make sure that you have all of your insurance policies. If you're printed, even better, or at least downloaded into a drive, which we'll talk about soon. That you have your home and vehicle ownership papers, which are going to be very important to accessing aid. Make sure that you have important financial records such as latest bank statements or maybe pay stubs. And then when it comes to medical information, make sure that you have copies of your medical history and of everyone in your household included within that prescriptions. Why is that so important? If you were to have to receive medical assistance somewhere else or systems are down, they're going to be able to look at that documentation really quickly. Let's say my chart is down or you're in a different place, and they can be able to better give you better medical assistance because you have all that documentation there. And I know it's a small thing, but it goes a long way, especially when we're talking about our health. Similar to prescriptions, if we need to refill our prescription, maybe in a pharmacy a town over that maybe is not connected with the pharmacy that we usually go to. Make sure that you also have your insurance cards, prescriptions, and then vaccination records ready to go as well. Once we're talking about securing important documents, I got started here with digital document storage because it's very important because oftentimes we're not going to be home to access those, or if not, if all else fails with how we secure physical ones, at least we have this as an option. You can scan documents with your phone, or you can do it with a home scanner. Oftentimes, libraries also have this service for free, so that's an option for as well. And then you need to save them in a secure place, whether that is a labeled flash drive. I like to keep a flash drive with important documents in my emergency bag, or if not, also on a secured cloud, whether that's Google Drive, iCloud, Dropbox, whichever you feel the most comfortable with that meets your security standards. And then if you can, another added layer of protection to those files could be to password protect them as well. And then when we're talking about storing physical documents, I know there's documents that are irreplaceable, or if not, they're very hard to replace and would take very long lines. So make sure that if you can, that you're putting them in a fireproof or waterproof safe, or even a safety deposit box if you have access to that. And if you don't have access to those, even a simple Ziploc bag in your emergency go bag can go a long way. I saw a lot of documents that made it and everything else didn't make it, but they did make it because they were in a Ziploc bag. You'd be surprised what a good sealed bag can do for you. And then if you can, keep your originals and backup copies in different places. So that way, if something does get damaged, not all of your important documents get damaged in one place. Okay, going really quickly here into mitigating risks to the property, or in other words, actions that you can take to reduce risk to your home. So starting here with the outside of our home, we want to make sure that you're taking time to remove that trees, overhanging limbs, any yard debris. This could be good not just for safety measures or if high wind comes and something can fall on your home, but also in the case of a wildfire, not having materials that can ignite easily in your yard. Making sure that you're inspecting all of your yard structures and sloped areas for any damages is a really good assessment to do every other couple of months. Making sure that you're cleaning gutters, drains, and downspouts. We want to make sure if there's any water coming into the home or coming on top of the home that is going away from the home and not getting stuck somewhere. So that's something good to do. Make sure that you're maintaining all of your non-combustible zones and defensible space around the home. Usually you want to make sure you have at least a minimum of 5 feet around the perimeter of your home, and that's a really good place to start. And then make sure that you're regularly inspecting your roof to keep it in good repair. And I mean that from the outside and also from the inside. So if you have someone who feels comfortable enough to go on top of the roof, or if not, into the attic, I know I'm not a big fan of the attic, but just to make sure that everything's attached correctly, that there's no light is not coming in from anywhere it shouldn't be, that everything's attached properly, that there's no leaks, different things like that. And it's good to put calendar reminders for all of these, because we don't expect you to do this all in one day. If you can, that is great, but maybe it's this month I'm going to be doing this, and next month I'm going to be doing this, and this repeats on a yearly basis, but it helps you keep up with things. Then when you're inside the home, making sure that you're inspecting all of your heating and cooling elements, also your water heaters. Now, as we get into cold weather, we want to make sure that things are in working order before harsh weather comes to us, right? Again, making sure that you're changing your filters, that you're inspecting caulk, weather stripping, insulation. This is a really good action that you can take in the mornings if you're drinking your coffee or morning beverage, as you stand in the windows to look out to the flowers, the garden, or anything like that. If you feel wind coming through somewhere that shouldn't be coming, put some tape on it, and you know that that's something that you need to tend to, or maybe ask someone to support with. And last but not least, very important to know where to shut off all of your utilities. That's gas, water, electricity. So getting familiar with it, or even trying it, see if everything's working correctly. And if it isn't, getting that repaired quickly, in the sense that if there is an emergency, that you can shut it off quickly. Preparing for power outages is very, very important, especially in the time of the year that we're at, because they can happen during any day, but now specifically during winter weather, we see it happen even more so. So it's very important that you're taking simple steps such as checking your smoke alarms, your carbon monoxide monitors. We know that carbon monoxide poisoning is very, very dangerous and a silent killer, unfortunately, especially when we're using alternative power sources. So we want to make sure that all of the things that could alert us to something like that are in functioning order. Understand if investing in a generator or an alternative power source, I know there's a plethora of options nowadays, is a good option for your household, depending if you're living in a house, an apartment. If it works for you, I know generators sometimes can give a little bit of trouble, but there's so many options, and also for all ranges of budget. So looking into what that can look like for you. And once you do that, making sure that you're using it correctly, especially with generators, like not using it inside, making sure that you're letting it cool before refueling, making sure that there's no cords in the water or the snow, different things like that. And if you can help someone with that process as well, that could go a really long way. Making sure also that we're not using our gas, stovetop, or oven to heat a home. I know desperate times oftentimes call for desperate measures, but if you know of someone or yourself who is doing that, help explore what other power alternatives could be good for them so they are staying safe during the season. And then here are a couple of quick actions folks can take. There's a lot we can do to prepare beforehand, but there's a lot of things that we oftentimes need to do if, especially if a storm or wildfire, if there's something that's happening that we know is coming. So this can look like placing sandbags at entry points, or moving valuable and irreplaceable items such as documents, electronics, even food and sentimental belongings off the ground floor, so they're protected from, let's say, water or any debris. If you can bring any outdoor furniture, toys, your tools, even sometimes vehicles inside into a protected area, that could be good. If things can't be moved indoors, think of securing them if possible. So if there's a shed, if that could be secured so it doesn't become a projectile, that's a really good option. If you have any non-essential appliances that can be disconnected, disconnect them, or if not, place them on surge protectors, because we know that different power surges can impact their functioning or damage them completely. So we don't want that to be an expense further down the road as well. When we're talking about wind, closing interior doors can actually reduce the pressure onto the roof by around 30%. And it can also prevent major structural damages, but also those same doors, windows that we're keeping closed can actually also help during a wildfire because they're going to limit oxygen flow. They're going to slow the spread of the fire. They can reduce smoke infiltration as well. The only difference here is that if you to keep them unlocked in the case that first responders or yourself need to exit the home and keeping all those lights on. Then, as we're talking now again also about winter weather, making sure that if you can increase the temperature in your home before winter weather, so that way you reduce the risk of suffering from the cold as well, but also it will help with the pipes. Now is a good time to insulate pipes, crawl spaces, garages, attics, and basements, similar to what we talked earlier about checking what needs to be maybe updated or redone. It's a good thing to do that as well. Protect pipes you can do that by opening your cabinet doors. I know folks do a slow drip. It looks very different depending on where you are, but understanding what are those things that you need to do. So if maybe you need to move some things in your cabinets, that can help as well. And then last but not least, making sure that you're identifying a safe interior room or storm shelter within your home, as well as sheltering your vehicles in the case of all the different things that can happen in the state. And then talking here about a couple of actions you can take to mitigate risks in your home. So these are things that we're not doing necessarily as a maybe a storm or wildfire or something's being announced at the moment, but things that we're doing maybe during good weather, right? And this can be, honestly, a lot of these options can be budget friendly. It could be reinforcing garage doors, your roof edges, small outdoor structures, so it can improve wind resistance. You can also protect or elevate your outdoor utilities, your HVAC units, service panels, so you reduce the vulnerability to them for events such as flooding. You can screening attic vents and vent covers to keep embers out during wildfires. And then you can keep clear debris-free zones around the house, similar to what we talked about, that defensible space in the case, again, of wildfires, because it's going to reduce the ignition risk around your home. And then when we're talking about flood protection, you can add backwater valves or sump pumps. You can even seal or elevate key, again, electrical that maybe is in a basement or anything like that, because all of this can help in terms of cost and damages, right? And then if you're thinking of already changing your floors or anything like that, something that you can do if you live in an area that's prone to floods is if you were replacing your carpet or you're replacing wood floors or anything like that, consider tile because well-maintained tile is very resilient in the case of flooding as well. And there's a lot of many options. We can go on for days similar to what I mentioned earlier, but you can learn more about these at smarthomeamerica.org. Okay, just breezing by through here, a couple other options that you can do here, and I'll mention just a few for time's sake because I know we have a couple questions in the chat. You can to continue those property mitigation options, you can install non-combustible fire-resistant exterior siding. Same goes for double pane or tempered glass windows. These both help with the risk of wildfires. You can build or retrofit your home to fortified standards, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But you can also upgrade your roof, your doors, and again, siding materials to make sure that you have impact and wind resistant materials. In the case for a state of Arkansas that experiences a wide variety of risk, these are also good options to take. And talking here about fortified roofs, and not beyond fortified roofs, the standard, basically what they do within the fortified standard is that the protection of these homes is rated to help with wind, rain, hailstorms, severe thunderstorms. There's even a fortified standards for wildfires, but all of this is that it's changes in materials and how nailing patterns and the way that things are evaluated. It's different simple things that are added throughout the construction and the process of building to fortified standards that make a home more resilient longer down the road. So we recommend you look this up at ibhs.org. And how do we talk so much about mitigation? It's because taking mitigation actions in your home not only is going to reduce the risk of damages or impacts to your household, it also has the capacity to reduce your insurance costs. So it's very important to speak with your insurance agent to look what this can look like for you in your area. If there's any tax incentives, in the case for Arkansas, there's a fortified roof program, so that can also help with reduced insurance. So looking at what are all these available programming incentives in your areas, so you can not only protect your home a little bit better, but also reduce cost. And to wrap up here, we're going to go into avoiding contractor fraud. Like Tessa mentioned, this is something that happens a lot, not only during our regular days, but especially after disasters. So a couple of warning signs to protect yourselves and others is oftentimes we're speaking with people and we're like, hey, that doesn't look right. Things to look out for are if someone's showing up unannounced and soliciting door-to-door services, especially after a disaster, that is not a good sign. A reputable contractor is going to have a long line of folks who have already called him. So they're not gonna have time to go door to door to offer services. During regular days, this might be a little bit better, but oftentimes after a disaster, this is not a great sign. They're using high pressure sales tactics or making unrealistic promises, like letting you know, oh, if you don't sign this today, or if you don't give your deposit today, you're not going to get this deal, or I'm not going to be able to help you, and you're going to have to wait 2 months. If someone's pressuring you that way, move on. That's not someone good to work with. They're not showing their ID, their license, their insurance. Legitimate contractors are used to being asked for this. Some will even go ahead and show it to you from the beginning because they know that this is something that is done. So make sure that you first ask for it. And if they show it to you, make sure that you corroborate that everything's right. They're not providing you with written estimates or a contract. Not only does this protect the contractor, but this protects you as an individual. So you want to make sure that you have someone who's giving you all that information. If they're demanding cash payments or large upfront fees, that's another a big warning sign because maybe a small fee like deposit is a little bit normal, but large sums are not. If they're asking you for a lot of details or details about your insurance settlement, a contractor does not need to know all that information. And if they're asking you to skip permits or inspections, I know it might sound good because you're itching to get back into your home, get things back to normal. But again, this is something that protects you, not down the line to make sure that your home is safe and up to code, but also it protects the contractor. So a reputable contractor is not going to ask you to skip these things. And then top tips. I already showed you those warning signs, but now things that we recommend that you do. Make sure that you're collecting at least 3 written quotes. It's okay to shop around and look at your options. Oftentimes you'll see varieties and things that are being offered. Make sure that you're creating that home inventory like we talked about. Again, not only is going to show the condition of your home, but also the belongings before any work happens. Make sure that you're checking all of those credentials. Oftentimes you can even call the county to corroborate information and provide, and that way you know who you're working with and if there's anything that you should be aware of. It's okay to ask for references. Oftentimes, a good contractor can actually even provide those ahead of time. If a contractor is not giving you references, that's also not a good sign. And don't be afraid to ask for them. It's good to know who you're working with. And then making sure that you get everything in writing, your scope, materials, schedule, payment terms. Again, this is not only something that protects you, but it protects the contractor. And then if you can, avoid paying in cash and making those large upfront payments. And with that, thank you so much, y'all, for sticking around with me. I know it's been a lot of content, but we have a lot of great resources here for y'all. If you want to know a little bit more about avoiding contractor fraud, but also supporting someone who might be experiencing that, you can check out AARP's Fraud Watch Network, but also SBP's contractor fraud guide. And I'll pass it over to Tessa to wrap us up. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leanne. That was a lot of really helpful information. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up here, but I just want to make one note. I saw a lot of questions, comments in the chat about the content shared in this session. The recording and a PDF of the slide deck will be made available to everyone. So don't feel like you have to rush and write down things quickly as we go through a couple of resources. We'll be following up. AARP will be following up with all of that, and we'll get together and make sure that they have all of the content that was shared out here. Next slide, please. So as we're wrapping up here, just a quick look at the main topic areas that Leanne really walked us through in such great detail. One, again, knowing that it starts with understanding your risks. This is the foundation of disaster preparedness. If you don't know what your risks are, then of course you're not able to take adequate action to get sufficiently prepared. So using tools like FEMA's National Risk Index is critical. From there, taking that risk information and crafting it into making a larger preparedness plan that really takes into account your family, your household specific needs, different disaster supplies that you might need, evacuation guidance, top tips for sheltering, and really starting to think through what is that financial plan for recovery. Protecting insurance falls into that as well, needing to make sure that we're thinking through how we're going to recover should we get impacted by a disaster. Protecting important documents is something, of course, that was covered today as well, understanding that there are multiple mechanisms for protecting your documents, both physically and digitally. And we do recommend an approach of both of those to make sure that you're properly secured and safeguarded. Mitigating risks to property, whether that's actions you'll take before disasters strike or just different longer term mitigation options they want to encourage you to think about. And then contractor fraud as an important area as well. Understanding that getting prepared for disasters means knowing how to navigate one if and when a disaster does occur. So this is just a quick walkthrough of the main takeaways that were covered today. And here we're excited to share out in partnership with AARP Arkansas. We have developed this flyer. It's a 2-page guide, and I will drop this in the chat momentarily. This can also be found on SBP's Resource Hub. This is a 2-page guide that walks through a condensed version, at least, of what Leanne walked us through today of different top tips for disaster preparedness. And this guide actually goes into more into the recovery side of things. So we talked a little bit about contractor fraud, and that's an important part of the recovery process. This has the whole backside is all about top recovery tips. So again, really want to thank AARP Arkansas for their partnership on this flyer, and we really appreciate your support, and we're happy to have this collateral here to share out with everyone. Next up, we talked a little bit about different resources that we have available in our resource hub at SBP. That is going in the chat as well in just a moment here. And so this is going to be a hub of different preparedness and recovery guides. And we really want to encourage you to check that out once we wrap up today. You can find different checklists and videos, different recordings like content that was shared out today and in other topic areas. And so we just encourage you to check that out once we wrap up as you continue along in your preparedness journey. And as we're wrapping up, we just wanted to share out one more resource. AARP has a disaster resilience toolkit, which is really a fantastic guide that walks through different case studies and different top tips and guidance points as you're seeking to build better disaster resilience in your communities at the household level, at the community level. And so if this is a space that you're interested in learning more about, we recommend that you check this out. It's pretty user friendly, doesn't go into too much technical jargon. So whether you have a lot of familiarity or if disaster resilience is newer for you, this is a really great accessible resource to read through. And we're just, again, sharing out a couple of resources. These slides and the recording will be made available to everyone, so don't feel like you have to quickly write this down. But we wanted to just share out some statewide resources in the state of Arkansas, knowing that every state has its own unique risks and challenges. And so taking a look at the statewide Division of Emergency Management and the Department of Health has a lot of great resources as well. So again, you can get that really tailored information that's going to be important for you to get as prepared as you possibly can at the household level. We're wrapping up now, and we just want to invite folks. We have a few minutes here if anyone has any questions. I did see that folks are using the chat to ask questions about the slides, but if anyone has any questions specifically about the content that was shared out or anything else that maybe wasn't covered in our session today, we have another minute or two here, and we really would love to hear from you. So I'll pause for a moment here as folks are thinking of any questions that they might have. I'm hearing no questions. If it is the case that anything pops up later today, later in the week, we have shared SBP's email address, email here. And so at prepare@sbpusa.org, please feel free to email us if you have any questions or you just like to get connected, learn about any other preparedness topics. We would be more than happy to share any additional information with you. And I see that Patricia has shared the AARP website on at the link in the chat as well. So please check that out. Thank you all. We'll wrap up now. We really appreciate your time. And thank you again to Patricia, Joan, and everyone at the AARP team for your partnership this year. Have a good day.
Thank you.